problem that the Germans had, and perhaps this is one what if that couldn't be solved, because it's one of those what ifs where the Nazis had to not be Nazis. But it's also possible that Goering and Raeder might have got on better, and Goering might not have been such a pig-headed idiot. So Goering said that everything that flies belongs to me, and he also thought that the invasion of Britain would be unnecessary, and that he could do it all just by bombing Britain into submission and cutting off the supplies to Britain. He didn't make any plans to support an invasion. No such plans were issued until September the 29th, 1940, which is long after the proposed invasion date and long after the end of the Battle of Britain. As far as the Navy was concerned, if the Luftwaffe had been cooperating properly with the Navy, they would have been able to use Luftwaffe aircraft properly as reconnaissance aircraft for the ships, and they would then have been able to avoid British ships more easily, or a Luftwaffe aircraft could have attacked British ships more often. The German U-boats, for instance, had a radio that allowed them to communicate with Luftwaffe aircraft, but they never used it. They always had to communicate. First, a message would go to the Luftwaffe headquarters, and then it would go to the U-boat headquarters, and then it would go to the U-boat, which meant that even if a plane was flying over a convoy and a U-boat was nearby, the message wouldn't get there till possibly the next day. It also meant, of course, that they couldn't build the two aircraft carriers that the Germans were attempting to build, even though one of them was 90% completed. They had aircraft, but they couldn't practice using them, and there were all sorts of problems that the Luftwaffe put in their way as far as that was concerned. They also had what was known as the Küstenflieger, or which might translate as Coastal Command, and they were given a whole bunch of old biplane aircrafts and all sorts of obsolete planes. Their job was to provide reconnaissance for the Navy and also to protect coastal shipping. And they were to be given Ju-88s, but the Luftwaffe took back all the crews, and the Küstenflieger was basically destroyed, and this resulted in 2 German destroyers being attacked by Luftwaffe aircraft, and which the crews reported sinking 2 battleships. One squadron of aircraft was the scourge of the Atlantic, did so much damage, and if they'd had more aircraft allocated to anti-shipping duties and there'd be better cooperation with the Navy, this would have made a difference to the chances of success for Operation Sealion. Another reason why Sealion was said to have little chance of success was because most of the large German destroyers were sunk and in the 2 battles of Narvik prior to the proposed invasion date. This didn't necessarily have to happen. What happened was that the German destroyers were not really designed for long sea voyages. They were designed for operations in the North Sea, and so when they got to Narvik they had to refuel. But of course Narvik was a neutral port at the time, and so the Germans planned to send 2 ships to refuel the destroyers when they got there. One of them was sunk on the way, and the other didn't have a proper refueling system. The destroyers also didn't have much space on them for storing ammunition. So the Germans were able to surprise the Norwegians in Narvik and take over the town and everything, but then the British surprised them. And in the first Battle of Narvik, the German destroyers outnumbered the British 2-1, and the German destroyers were almost twice the size of the British destroyers, as well as being much better armed. And in fact, the biggest German destroyers were not far off being very similar to the smallest British cruisers. to protect them from air attack, the destroyers had been spread out through the fjord. They were out of fuel and quickly ran out of ammunition. The German submarine that was on guard shot at the British ships, but its torpedoes didn't explode, so that's the torpedo problem for you. The British destroyers attacked in a snowstorm and weren't seen. So there were lots of things that where, just a bit of luck went the Germans' way. Things might have been different in the first battle, but in fact what happened was the British lost 3 out of 5 destroyers, sunk or heavily damaged, while the Germans lost 2 destroyers sunk, 1 ammunition supply ship was sunk, 6 cargo ships were sunk, and 4 destroyers were damaged. And they used up their ammunition. So now, in addition to being out of fuel, they were now out of ammunition. And the Admiralty must have rubbed their hands together and said, yay, let's send some more. And this time we'll send our biggest destroyers, the Tribal class, which had 8 guns to the German ship's 5 guns, even though they were smaller in caliber. And they also sent the battleship Warship and the aircraft carrier Furious. And again, they surprised the Germans, although the aircraft strike was not successful due to bad weather. But the remaining destroyers were all sunk or beached at little cost to the British. If things had been slightly different, it might have been that some of those destroyers had survived and would have been able to be used in a sea lion invasion, and that would have dramatically altered the odds of success, although of course they would still be outnumbered. Another major what if that would have affected Sea Lion, of course, is that the BEF came very close to being captured. It was in total rout. There had been various previous orders issued to German troops to tell them to stop and wait for the infantry to catch up with them and for the tanks to be repaired or to receive maintenance. And Guderian and various other German commanders had found ways around them. Like Guderian, he said, oh yes, but can I go on a reconnaissance in force? And they said, oh, all right, you can do that. And the reconnaissance in force ended up on the French coast. So the order was issued again on May the 24th, 1940, and this time it was issued by the Army Group Commander von Rundstedt, and it was confirmed by Hitler. And this allowed the British troops, who were in total disarray, to reform and organise a defence along canals and in the marshes near Dunkirk, and enabled the BF to be successfully evacuated. Another reason they were able to be evacuated was the weather. The weather was just perfect for the defenders. It wasn't too bad to prevent troops from being taken off the beaches, but it was bad enough, that is, it was overcast, to prevent German aircraft from flying on most of the day's time. If other weather had prevailed, either it would have been very good weather and German aircraft would have been attacking much more often during the daytime, or it would have been very bad weather and troops wouldn't have been able to be taken off the beaches, or even from the they were taken from the outside of the mole from the harbour. So that wouldn't have been possible either. And that's probably one reason why they thought they would only rescue 40,000 men from the BEF. As it was, more than 400 vessels were sunk, and evacuation during daylight was stopped during the evacuation from Dunkirk, Operation Dynamo. If the BEF had been captured, it would have been much the worse for the British in terms of having troops available to defend their island. And although they still had the Royal Navy, it would have been a huge political tool for the appeasers in the British Parliament to say they wanted to negotiate with Hitler, and also a bargaining tool for Hitler himself in such a negotiation. Either they would have been no invasion because of the peace that would have been negotiated, or else the invasion itself would have had very much greater chance of success. Another possibility is that Hitler talked to Raeder about the start of the war in a more honest way, instead of telling him that he had until 1944 to complete the construction of the German fleet. He didn't even tell him when the war was about to start on August the 31st, 1939, which was actually his first day that he was intended to attack Poland. He didn't tell Raeder, not until the very last moment. So if Raeder had been told earlier about the actual invasion of Poland was about to start, he could possibly have ordered more German ships to sea, that is the Navy, and ordered the German merchant Navy to return to Germany or to more favourable neutral ports. And this would have meant that some of the German ships would have got back to Germany, and there would have been more transports available for Sealion. Another thing that Raeder could have done, if he'd known that the war was about to start earlier than expected, would have been to change Plan Z completely and build more submarines, which is what happened as soon as the war started. They planned to build 16-inch gun battleships, and all the rest of it was abandoned, and they started building more U-boats, but by then it was much too late. And by the time of Sealion, they only had at the most 50 U-boats, and at least half of those were the coastal and training boats. Dönitz said that he would provide all 50 U-boats for the invasion, but a lot of those would have had crews that were only half trained and were of limited utility. Another thing that could have happened if they started building more U-boats earlier is they could have used the Dutch device, which was the snorkel, but of course they thought they didn't need it at that stage because they weren't at war and they were doing okay.